Good afternoon. I'm glad to continue this talk about red lines and how they are implemented in the parliament, those who will enter the new Verkhovna Rada. I would like to introduce our participants of today's discussion. Andrei Giros, servant of People's Party representative, Taras Kazak, Golos Party representative, Nina Yuzhanina, European Solidarity Party, Sergei Sobolev, Fatherland Party, Olga Romaniuk, Force and Dignity Party representative. Also in the hall we have experts, Gleb Vishlinsky, Executive Director of the Center of Economic Strategy, Alena Pavlenka, Director of Dixie Group, and Oleg Nevsky, teacher of Kiev School of Economics, and also we have journalists, so we will try to have time for questions. So as you understand, we are going to speak about economy. Each of our participants, they are experts on economics, on economy, and we will give 2 or 3 minutes to each participant. We would like to outline the main issues. We would like to know about the views of your parties on important issues, and we will have also Q&A session. I would like to start with such question, painful issue, labor migration. Different figures are presented. So, could you tell me how many Ukrainians left Ukraine as labor migrants? Sergei, please. I believe this is about 7 or 9 millions. These who have green cards, permanent residents, I believe not less than this. According to Force and Dignity Party, 5 to 7 million. Is this about the whole period of independence or those who are migrants now? Let's speak about the whole period of independence. I believe not less than Sergei Sobolev said. If we are speaking about 28 or 29 years, so the figures is like this. My impression, more than 10 million, up to 10 millions. Part of them are seasonal workers. They go for seasonal works, and permanent, this is about 5 million people. I suppose that we have 10 million people. They do not pay social contributions, and they work illegally, or they are migrants. I cannot provide exact figures that they are so big, but I may mention labor migrants in Poland, up to 2 million. If you're speaking about 2 million and up to 10 million, this is an impressive figure. Do you have plans, clear plans, or the view how to return these people back? Please outline 2 or 3 steps. I do not want to say banal things because a lot has been said about it recently. We traveled in the region and we saw that the income of people who work in other countries, it may be the same in Ukraine, but social packages are absent. And social package is really needed, even more than the payment for work. One of the most important instruments is to create such conditions in order to provide social package in Ukraine that correspond to European standards. And second, we need in the nearest future to deal with the system of professional education. Trained people should work in Ukraine, and in the regions, legislation should be revised concerning technical lyceums and colleges in order to create such conditions for employers to invest in people who will become their workers, and this should be of interest for employer and for people, and we need to provide professionals for this work. Sometimes employers, they help people to get qualification, but then people leave abroad because payment is real low, salaries are low. First, we should put diagnosis. First, this is the issue of income of citizens. Even at the level that we have now, I believe this doesn't give ground to say that in the nearest 2 or 3 years there will be a trend to reduce the number of migrants. It is difficult to forecast and to provide order of the state for some professions, and the number of specialists in separate fields who are trained, it does not correspond to needs. These people, they are with high education, but they are not needed in the market. And there are some professions that are really needed, and today they are lacking, and the salary may correspond to the European standards in these areas. And also there are issues connected with household conditions and the opportunity of self-realization. That's why if we answer to each question, I believe that key is the first issue. This is the introduction of the law about price formation, and the owners of big corporations, they should not take their funds abroad and then reinvest them in Ukraine. But this will force them to provide proper salary, and the salary should be paid here in Ukraine. And also, this is the issue of order of the specialist, of the training of specialists. This is connected with the quality of education, and I believe that this is the key reason. And today, Poland is not the market for employment of our citizens, but also today the biggest number of specialists who are trained abroad, they are trained in Poland in different programs. Today this is about the programs of about culture, and also these are specialists in agriculture and many other sectors. And this is one of the main reforms in higher education that is really needed, and also overall system of medical insurance and the absence of insurance, and we do not have proper insurance and proper guarantees to each worker that is officially employed. For example, they have it in Poland. This is not only about salary, but this is the package of guarantees that it is provided officially by the employer. Thank you. Could you please tell us? Oh, Nina, would you like to add something? Please tell us about time limits. So I've said about 2 or 3 minutes. So from the other side, we should create proper conditions for people here and to reduce the pace of prices and tariffs. I would like to ask you, does your political force propose to decrease communal tariffs that you've mentioned, and the issue of tariff? It provides well-being of Ukrainian families, and in order to remain in Ukraine and to work for Ukraine and to increase its social development, we should establish tariffs that are lower. Not tariffs, but the share of household budget for communal tariffs. Tariffs are high in Ukraine, and there are ways to reduce them. But this is not about tariffs. This is about income. We should take care of the incomes and salaries and other types of income will help. And in order to stop this outflow of young people who go abroad. Also, problem is not only migration. We should also help those people who are there to return to Ukraine. And Force and Dignity Party, we have clear programs how to do it, because we want that people who work there, who got experience, who have some money there, we want them to return and to invest in Ukraine. And what about your position? This position was actively discussed before. I will answer two questions at once. From sociological surveys, they see that the main priority for Ukrainians is economic welfare. For households, this is income minus taxes minus tariffs that you should pay. And you have discretionary income that you may spend for your own needs. So why do people go abroad? Because of low incomes. In order to increase incomes, economy should increase. So after 5 years ago, after 5 years of growth, we have low growth, and in Poland they have much more. And we should accelerate the pace of the development of economy. We need investment to create new working places, to have higher salaries, and production should be more efficient. This is not about buying land. This is about investment into technologies and better productivity of labor. We should create investment climate. The issue of corruption, there should be rule of law to decrease bureaucracy. And also the issue of the tariffs will be reduced when incomes increase. Also about tariffs. Of course, we should find ways to decrease the tariffs where it is possible and to create competition in order to decrease the tariffs. And we have separate issues. For examples, in June, we decreased the price for 7%, and this is not about the consequences, but also the reasons. The reason is monopolization of markets, and the demonopolization of markets is the main priority, and this will reduce prices. So you said about demonopolization of markets. So importance of independence of regulators, and we see weird decisions of courts, and this is a challenge for Ukraine. And the question to Taras Kazak: does your political force see the grounds for independent work of such institutions? The energy regulator, the regulator in the sphere of television and broadcasting. So these bodies should be independent. National Bank got its independence in 2015. The law was adopted on independence of the National Bank. Despite the pressure of different monopolies and oligarchs, the National Bank continues its work to strengthen financial system and national currency. Many people don't understand this and trust to this institution as low, but the specialists positively assess the activity of NBU. Other institutions, the situation differ. For example, the situation in Antimonopoly Committee, we believe that this body does not correspond to the challenges Ukraine faces. That's why this body, it should be cleared from the representatives of oligarchs, and we should have young specialists there who will be independent and who will be able to play important role in demonopolization of Ukrainian economy. So oligarchs, they have their representatives in different bodies. And Voice Party, we have clear plan of actions that we should implement in order to demonopolize Ukrainian monopolies. So the economy without so this is one of our main slogans. And also in the court system, we see that the high qualification commission of judges should be reloaded. Law enforcement and anti-corruption system. NKREKP doesn't implement its function properly. Instead of fighting those people who worked in civil service and they have huge assets and they do not have questions to them, and NKREKP fights instead the activists who help to fight with corruption. So the same, we have questions to Special Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office, and all these bodies, they should be reloaded. And legislation is not bad, but nomination to these bodies, that they were made not in the best way, and the representatives of civil society was not allowed, and we should reload the system. And I would like to give the floor to Nina. So whether you are ready to work in order to demonopolize Ukraine, especially in the energy sector. First, I would like to note, when we're speaking about state regulators, they work in the spheres where there are trends or where monopolies really exist. I would like to bring such an example. We have natural monopolies that were fought against by market. Let's speak about communication services market. For example, state monopoly of Ukrtelecom, the state, and they pressured the customers, and this issue was not resolved for a long time. Private sector that directed investment and parallel built the lines of communication that provide bigger spectrum and better price policy. It was better than Ukrtelecom provided, and now they are with nothing. I believe that this is the only way, and we should go along this way in order to change this situation. There should be proper market situation, and this should be done naturally. Antimonopoly Committee has instruments, 10% of income of these monopoly operations of entities. This is a big financial sanction that can stop and prevent such monopoly collusions and actions in our country. But this sanction doesn't work. But in all countries, it is huge and it is active. That's why we should work on legislation in order to make it obligation, not just the right of Antimonopoly Committee to do this. About electricity supply lines. Previously, it was natural state monopoly, and now it is divided. It is also with participation of private capital, and Antimonopoly Committee should carry out control. And starting 1st of July, I'm not a specialist in this field, but if electricity market works, we will see whether we are ready to resolve this issue in civilized way and how the system will develop. We have an example of an efficient state monopoly, Ukrzaliznytsia, Ukrainian railway company. And this is about price policy and run an efficient management. And it resulted in different problem in the country. This is reloading of the roads and reorientation of the business. That's why everything should be resolved by market opportunities, by market way. It should not be done forcefully. And about other type of category of monopoly, for example, if some influential people influence and create such monopolies. So this introduction of the market is this the way to fight monopolies. We shouldn't confuse natural monopolies and monopolies that de facto were created in the market. Natural, this is networks, electricity, heating, this should be regulated by the state. We cannot change them because if we would have two lines to one house, so the price will be too high. So in the energy market, this is extraction of gas or coal or electricity supply. We speak about the market that was launched on the 1st of July. The effect is 25% to the price of electrical energy. Whether it is a positive reform for the economy, we will assess this on our own. 35 billion will be taken out from the economy to the benefit of those participants. Only two people control the 80% of generation of electricity. We should increase competition, and then the state can stop regulating. But when the state just stop to regulate monopoly market and then say, you have some free market and competition will do everything else. But first, the state should intervene to help to establish competition. So there are fine professional moments. So your political forces for state regulation of energy sector. Of the nature market. We believe that market should not be controlled by the state, but if they are monopolized, they should be controlled by the state in some form. For example, the experience of France, electricity of France was recognized as monopoly and is controlled by the state. Standard Oil in the US, the state also interfered and divided them and created competitive markets. So monopoly markets, in some form, they need interference of the state if there is sharp competition. For example, in the potato area, for example, there is sharp competition and the state should not intervene. Are you for or against the regulation in the sector? I support the position of Mr. Geras. So if the market is competitive, the state should not interfere. And when we are speaking about the electricity market starting 1st July this year, I would like to say that the market was not introduced. Because if this is market, all the prices should be market prices. They should be established based on competition. But the government, despite numerous proposals by international experts and also the representatives of the office of Zelensky said about the delay of this market, but this market was introduced, and the government of Ukraine takes decision to put special responsibilities on state companies, including Antimonopoly, Hydroenergo, and they should provide subsidies for the prices of population. The prices will be lower than market prices. But the question is whether this is market, whether it is competition. Once again, we manually regulate the prices, and this contradicts the market. The same about manual regulation of the price. The Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine adopted resolution 560 to put the cap on prices, and they limit the for heat energy. They have the limit of 1,400 hryvnias. So about land market, about the moratorium on the sales of land, let me allow to say briefly about introduction of gas and electricity market. I believe that no mechanism is working and monopolies remain. They provide services in the form of the transit through energy networks or gas networks, and I believe that nothing was done in order to demonopolize these services. Also, we have limitations on entrance on electricity and gas networks, and this is not natural, and we do not have independent regulators. What was done by the Constitutional Court to recognize the formation of the regulators and constitutional, I think this is this has at last we have the opportunity to review the nomination of independent regulators that are completely dependent. In fact, this is about Antimonopoly Committee and many other regulators. And I believe that here we have answer, where we have opportunity to have clear market mechanism of formation of tariffs. And the last one about redistribution of oil and gas fields, when the state put many millions for development, and these fields are put in the hands of those who do not want to pay even for 3 or 5 years to pay rent and taxes. So this shows the situation in the market. And I am not only saying about the regulation of LNG terminals, shale gas, and other things. We may continue. Now about the land market. I believe that in 1.5 years, we did more for this market than during all previous years. Our position is clear. Without introduction of all the mechanisms that will allow to create market conditions for management and ownership and selling of agricultural land, we won't be able to make the next step, no matter what time we will need. The first mechanism that is launched, this is the opportunity to freely buy and sell land for new agricultural enterprises, including agricultural enterprises and the companies that are called so for farmers. They may provide 15 to 20 hectares of land, and we will be able to introduce legislative acts. And after this, due to limitations for big enterprises, in order not to repeat what was done in the electricity and gas sector. Due to regulation of the market, we will be able to introduce other market mechanisms. And the last one and very principal issue, unfortunately, during the last years, we made steps back, and one of the steps, I believe, is the cancellation of the night tariff for enterprises and communal enterprises. I believe that this is hit against small business, because big business, they also always have regulatory opportunities. They are the owners of the metallurgy plants and energy companies, and small and medium-sized businesses. Then municipalities, they were really hit. And second decision is prepared to cancel night tariff for population, and I do not think that we may not call it a good mechanism for regulation of energy market. We believe that agricultural land market is needed for Ukraine for this. we need to make several quick steps and to launch it the first we can. The first stage, there will be some limitations. Several draft laws were prepared, and we may choose what we like. That will be supported by the Verkhovna Rada, but this is unacceptable when there is ownership for land. But we know people cannot officially say, and many people just died, and they were not able to buy land and sell this land. And farmers, they cannot buy land. So if land is not theirs, it is difficult for them to grow multi-year plants. So there are big landlords who use the situation in order to create huge banks of land, and they lease it, and they pay small money to the owners, and they create big opposition to real land market. At the beginning of 1990s, the majority of citizens in Ukraine were for the land market. Then, during many years of zombieing on TV, the opinion of people was changed concerning land market. And unfortunately, today, Ukrainians do not want to have more rights. This is weird, but this is like this. So Center Rozumkoy provides data that 72% of Ukrainians are against land sales. Only for 2 years, for the last years, we have professional talks about land market. And Agrarian Committee is dealing with it in the Verkhovna Rada. We have 15 draft laws that were registered. They were broadly discussed. But even among specialists, there is no proper decision or compromise. This issue is rather difficult, and we should discuss it at big platforms of people, specialists. You know that about 30 associations in the agrarian sector, they cannot agree among themselves. That's why for us it is important that in this sector we should take into account all anti-monopoly principles. A lot of land that is unofficially processed, and there is also a big illegal circulation of land in the sector, and we should fight it. We should go into the right direction, but we do not succeed in this, and we should have balanced approach to resolution of the problems. And then we will have balanced things to adopt. So we should protect small and medium-sized enterprises. Some programs were adopted, and we started to speak about small farming, but these are people who should work officially, and the open land market will help us to resolve some difficult issues in the sector. Olga, please. Whether to sell land or not. So, Force and Dignity Party is for open, civilized land market. The land should be sold to citizens of Ukraine, and we are against selling the land to foreigners during first years of selling. Also, we should provide some limitations while opening the market. We should establish minimum state price for selling. Also, limitation on the number of lands that can be sold to one person. We should not allow concentration of big amounts of land in the framework of one regional oblast. Here we should have balanced approach. We should put moratorium on reselling of land in the first years. We are for a free market of land to lift this moratorium, and we are sure that this will help us to accelerate economic development in Ukraine. Servant of People Party. Taras said that they are for the fast introduction of land market, but we want to have quality in introduction of this land. You said 72%. Why the situation is like this? Why so many people are afraid, are not sure in the land market? We should study the privatization experience. There was redistribution of ownership rights. This was about enterprises, and now this is about land. And we see the results of privatization, and this has, for example, the case of Krivostoly, there were competitive situation for privatization, and other processes didn't lead to economic development. They resulted in localization and monopolization. For example, in Poland, there were European investors, and this was a big drive for economic development. And what we see, these are the factors of privatization here and there, and how it influenced on migration, on incomes of population. So we should introduce the land market, but we should do it clearly, according with mechanism. There should be transparency, legality of the processes of selling and buying of land. So there should be good examples on small land plots with some limitations. And when we see that everything is working, then we will continue, and there will be more trust from the public. Before Q&A session, we have one important issue. This is really broad, but I would like to reduce it to one question. This is about cooperation with IMF, and it involves many different aspects. Please identify whether your political force is for continuation of cooperation with IMF, or you believe that Ukraine is able, without the support of IMF, to move forward.
Sergei, will you start? With such huge debts, we have two options. Either to try to follow the Yanukovych path and start reorientation of our credit package to Russia, and we have some political forces which clearly state this. But our political force believes that since 10 years ago, we actually had settled all the debts with Russia, and our credit portfolio allowed us to allowed us to get rid of that huge pressure upon us, which might be expected. But we now have to tackle the conditions for debt restructuring, because it seems to me that conditions which were negotiated in 2015, they nevertheless make a huge pressure on us, and we have to try further restructuring. So we have to start civilized negotiations, review the restructuring program, and this will be the first serious step. Then we should think about serious cooperation with the IMF and reinvest into those sectors of Ukrainian economy with the assistance of IMF, which would allow us to develop. Then we should rethink our contributions to the international organizations. When this was done once, when IMF paid $2 billion, and this was reinvested into Ukrainian economy. This was done without further debts which should be serviced. So we have to think about restructuring of debts, but with the favorable attitude from those parties which provided us with them. Our party believes, Force and Honor believes that we should continue our cooperation with IMF because we do not have sufficient grounds for international development. Cooperation with IMF will be a good signal for other investors to enter Ukraine and to invest here. We also believe that cooperation with IMF will be a good signal for the World Bank to provide their money to us. Another important aspect which we should keep in mind that is that the biggest repayment amounts of money, biggest repayment should be done in 2019-2020. But thinking about our cooperation with IMF, we should keep in mind Ukrainian interests. Sometimes loans from IMF is accompanied with the worsening of life standard among Ukrainians. We have to stand firmly for our position and do not allow erosion of the life standard of ordinary people. At the same time, we should prevent any debt default for Ukraine. So we have carefully negotiated with our partners. So, Andrei, how impossible should be done? We should continue our cooperation with IMF because this is the objective reality, that we growth of 2.5% in the last quarter. This we growth suggests that the economy still has not preconditions for rapid growth. We stand for structural changes, for changes in economy. We should prevent problems with in anti-corruption legislation. We have to increase competitiveness of Ukrainian economy, and thus, we will be able, without that factors, we'll be able to borrow from the International Monetary Fund. Cooperation with internal economic changes are needed to suspend our cooperation with IMF. With the GDP growth of 6%, we will step back from this position. Taras, what is position of the Voice Party? I don't think we have any alternatives from IMF. IMF is not crediting Ukrainian budget. It provides money to NBU for strengthening Ukrainian currency reserves. Since 2014, we do not get any borrowings from IMF. And another aspect, cooperation with IMF opens way to cooperation with other countries and other investors. Not all the investors are able to analyze situation in Ukrainian economy independently, and here they rely on IMF. But Ukraine all the time is under reaching the IMF standards, understanding that Ukrainian authorities quite often deceive IMF, not fulfilling their obligations, like with the provision about illegal earnings. We should demonstrate to IMF that we are eager to implement reforms, unlike it was in the past when we were unable to implement the full scope of reforms. Of course, we want stability of exchange rate, but you cannot build up development, economic development and growth of the country based on loans and credits. That's why we cooperate with IMF, while this means only stability of Ukrainian currency in European solidarity. That's true that IMF carries out its direct function and at the same time is the indicator of economic stability in this country, and all other countries focus their attention on IMF. And we should be very attentive to the schedule of debt payments and debt settlement payments. At the same time, cooperation with IMF is a good additional analysis from a side. And according to IMF figures, labor migration in Ukraine is between 2 and 3 million. The roadmap about implementation of the European legislation is a good roadmap because we try to reach European life standards both for Ukraine, for the citizens and the country. And that's why we believe that in our negotiations we should keep in mind broader compromise in order to get more for the country. Now we clearly see that we managed to implement 42% of our commitments aimed at harmonization with Europe, and we have seen that not everything is perceived by Ukrainian society. You mentioned about so-called reforms. It's not true. The reforms were started, and they were started with involvement of IMF, but we did not manage to reach all the citizens and convince all the citizens that reforms should continue. That's why we should elect the parliament which will work, will correct mistakes and will allow us to move forward. Now we open our Q&A session. Gleb Vyshlinsky. I have two questions to all the speakers. I don't intend to criticize. I just want to clarify the sequence of priorities. What are the three initiatives aimed at speeding up economic growth, which your political forces will promote in the parliament or in the government if your political force will dominate in the parliament? So about three specific initiatives which are measurable. The second question about State enterprises. Now we have a list of enterprises which are prohibited for privatization, and the value of their assets is around 1 trillion of hryvnia. So the question to you, what are 3 top enterprises that should be privatized during the next term of the parliament in order to resolve the problem of corruption at the governmental level, which we have not? Let's limit to 2 questions because it's extremely difficult. And one more critical question. You all mentioned about moratorium on land circulation. We have been working this for 20 years. The Batkivshina party was, the Batkivshina party leader used to be a prime minister. The European Solidarity leader was president, and you done actually nothing in this area. And when I heard from Andrei that something extremely difficult should be done, so this again does not convince me that the issue will be resolved. You are speaking longer than the speakers. In early 90s, privatization of food stores was welcomed by people, but big metallurgical plants were not privatized. Let's start with Andrei. So direct question was to you about the quality of land reform. How you can put it under question? I can provide you with many examples that poor quality of reforms resulted in very poor results. I do not mean that we should sell just one land plot and expect that other land plots will be sold. We have to launch like a pilot project of smaller land plots, then extended it to bigger land plots. That is not to do it as one moment, but to do it gradually. About state enterprises, we should determine three governmental enterprise which should be remained in state property. All the rest are sources of corruption. What are sources for development? The success of reform is not when after 5 years of reform the population is strongly against reforms, voting 73% against them. So they should be quick, they should be of high quality, and they should be successful. So everything should be done quickly and comprehensively. Sergei, 3 steps and 3 enterprises. I also will start from the agrarian reform. Let us analyze all decisions of the parliament that were passed by 2009. They were approaching to the land market opening. Unfortunately, since 2010, we had no such draft laws. The only the only draft law which became to bill. This was about small land plots circulation, and we managed to pass it through the parliament with support of experts from other functions. The biggest thing is right to own the land during 2 years from the moment when free delivery of documents for the land plot ownership, almost 3 million were issued. Without such issuance of the documents, further implementation of the market would not be possible. Your second question about 3 governmental enterprises. We should introduce regular financial reports and see, in this case, we would like to see financial reports of Energoatom, Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, because each private enterprise, each private company produces its annual financial report, while our seaports, while our power plants, they do not produce financial reports, and publication of such financial report would allow us to see whether they are efficient, and then we should continue privatization, which started with the same prime minister when Krivorozhstal was privatized. And now 3 key decisions. My colleagues several times mentioned that without GDP growth of 6-7%, we could not get rid of the IMF support, but without restructuring of debts, we would not be able to invest into development of our economy. We would not be able to push forward our economy with a higher rate than 4%. This is my strong belief. Then, without involvement of investors, we should decide what to do with our external investor who last year invested in 11 billion hryvnia. They cannot invest in currency. They should convert it into Ukrainian currency. They should pay taxes on this money, and the state does nothing to make this tax minimal. And the key issue is what to do, to decide what we want to do with the market development. That is against monopolistic markets in the electricity and energy markets. I mean, Rotterdam plus liberation of the night tariff, etc. This would be good and specific steps. Olga, about 3 enterprises and key steps. Today, our economy is in bad position, and 3 steps are not enough. I would like to start with the fiscal reform. The amounts of taxes which should be paid today, they they're a big burden for small and medium-sized businesses. That's why our party believes that we should cut down the number of taxes and the amounts of tax rates. Then the shadowization of our economy is a big problem. We stand for the taxes on big capital. It should work inside the country but not be withdrawn abroad. Last year, 2.5 billion of $2.2 billion of investments and 3.5 billion of withdrawn capital. We should bring back Ukrainian labor migrants. We should allow tax vacation for them and encourage them to invest into Ukrainian economy. We understand, we believe that this will promote development of businesses considerably. Then demonopolization of energy sector. We continue to work on this. The third direction is reform of the customs service. We have a big potential to fight corruption and increase budget revenues here in customs sector, which would allow us to move forward with our social reforms. We don't have time for further discussion on this issue. And about free enterprises, I would not wish to be to make assumptions now. I would like to think carefully. Ina, your statements. I'd been listening to my colleagues and I'd been thinking that we should work tough on formation of the professional government. Unfortunately, empty words are not enough now. European solidarity in recent future in the parliament will take set of measures for development of SMEs. They are in unequal position, especially in some sectors. Then we should better regulate their work in other markets, and there are a lot of things which are in regulation. We should introduce changes to labor legislation, and labor legislation is inappropriate for SMEs and work with huge fines. People are frightened because they simply cannot comply with labor legislation. We should change regulations about the cash registrators, servicing of cash registrators. This is a big issue. SMEs suffer most from our economic regulations. The second issue is about bigger businesses. We should finalize de-offshorization. During the first month, we should pass the package of legislation aimed at BEPS implementation. The base erosion and profit shifting is the main problem for us. We have to implement these provisions to Ukrainian legislation, because thus the profit tax base erosion is happening. Then we should continue structural reforms of the tax authority. They will continue. This will be a long process, but we should to establish one law enforcement agency which has to tackle the issue of financial crime as to the public finance. This body should be modernized, created with involvement of experts. We have to reach a trade-off, but we have to start this process because this is possible to implement only at the beginning of new parliament's term. You mentioned that nothing had been done with the land reform, but initiative of our MPs during last 2 years, we were allowed, and our experts provided 15 scenarios, 15 options for the policy. And thank you that you push us up to close long discussions and try to resolve the issue. As for the state enterprises, we had to understand clearly which enterprises should remain in state property. In society, we have very different views about privatization. Sometimes state enterprise is inefficient because of bad managerial processes. So, yeah, we cannot postpone longer. Thank you. It was only Ina who slightly mentioned the rule of law. I believe there should be, number one, reform which prevents rapid development of businesses irrespectively of their size. The rule of law is a symbol that should be implemented as quickly as possible. This was mentioned by the president and many political parties. The rule of law includes judiciary reform, law enforcement system, introduction of unified body which can interfere into the economy. For law enforcement agencies now, business is a source of income. The second reform for us is demonopolization. We have to change the membership of Antimonopoly Committee. We have to strengthen our legislation. We have to build up free economy without monopolies. And the third reform, which should be done, the suspension reform. With each year, it becomes more and more difficult to cover the deficit of the pension fund. 167 billion of hryvnia, the deficit of pension fund, and some 10 billion of hryvnia should be given to this. So we do not understand how our pensioners should survive. This should be done immediately. With our demography, it's the radical problem. The quasi-reforma that was implemented in October 2017 had not resolved the issue. As for the three enterprises which should be privatized, one is very symbolic, Ukrspert. This is a black enterprise in terms of corruption. It is very beneficial for its administration, but for the state it is it is full of losses. Of course, Ukrainian railway company also can be privatized. I mean rails, while all the rest could be privatized. We cannot privatize Energoatom. All the rest, which are not of strategic importance, should be sold as quick as possible. I would like to remind you an example of the Odessa seaport plant. Some years ago, $1 billion were offered for it, and we have not sold it. While today, $200 million, and nobody wants to take it. And one more question. I have more questions. I have two questions. I have two very brief questions. One of the requirements of the European Union is so-called energy transition and rejection from fossils in the future. For Ukraine, it should be a priority in future. For Ukrainian politicians, it's not convenient topic. We have up to 50,000 of miners, and it's not so easy to say to them that they have no perspective. So my question, what do your parties offer to the miners, and what is your strategy as to the fossil fuels, and what will be the policy of your parties if in 2020 Russia will suspend gas transit via Ukraine? Andrei, we had to finish our session 5 minutes ago. Now, the question about miners, the biggest incentive for mining sector is to develop is the price of coal. Rotterdam Plus made it extremely beneficial and attractive, this sector. You know my attitude to Rotterdam Plus formula. Of course, our coal, thermal power plants on coal should have no future, and this will improve the situation. As for the miners, my father-in-law and my father, they are miners, and they have this occupation because they do not have other options. If we offer requalification for them, if we offer something good, something better for them as employment, they will choose another employment. The second question about suspension of gas transit. Probably it's not a question to the political parties, it's a question to the government. Now we are pumping in a sufficient amount of gas, and Naftogaz hopefully will go into the borrowing market in order to finalize pumping into this underground storages. They are now implementing swap mechanisms, and our objective is not to have critical dependence from Russia, so we should be able to survive this winter without Russian gas. Dear speakers, excuse me, please. Andrei requested for early departure. Sergei, I also need to go. I will answer quickly about gas transit. I don't think that Putin would agree with the gas transit agreement which was signed in 2008-2009. Russia had lost much on that agreement. Moreover, the formula transit or payment would never apply to other transit agreements. So I think that unfortunately this agreement will terminate in January 1st, 2020, and yet the only thing is that the gas would be bought at the western border of Ukraine, and there should be relations between Ukraine and Western companies. We would not have that present of we had in 2008. This was $2.8 billion which had to be paid by Russia to Ukraine. Unfortunately, we have to go. Olga, as for the production of coal and protection of miners, our energy balance has a big distortion. As to the fossil fuels, 96% of our fuels come from fossils, from natural gas and coals, while the share of renewables is only 4%. That's why we believe that renewables share should be increased. This is in our plans. What could be done? We should stimulate the growth of wind, solar energy, use biogas and biofuels. These are not traditional fuels for Ukraine. We should promote their use. As for the cutting down the amounts of coals, especially on thermal plants, this is environmentally expensive. So we have to step back from the use of coal in the use in energy generation. I fully agree with my colleague that we have to develop the social adaptation programs for miners and Taras. As for the second question, our party clearly states that Ukraine has to shift to renewables as quickly as possible. This is solar and wind. We should move in this direction, involve investors, and we should speed up this process. I believe that today it's a very obsolete approach to burn coal on thermal power plants, especially keeping in mind that the bigger part of coal is produced from DPR, LPR. As for the miners, yes, we have to retrain them. And in our party program, we mentioned that the economy of the future, the economy of knowledge, this is the knowledge economy, and they will be able to work in more pleasant places, jobs, than mines. And I believe many miners will welcome that approach. The second question was about Russian gas. I think the most useful approach for Ukraine would be to buy gas at the eastern border of Ukraine and then transported via Ukrainian territory by a consortium. How to survive during next year? Having not income from the gas transit, and we do not think that Nord Stream 2 would not be finished by 2020, and we believe that the problem will be postponed for the future. As for the first question, instead of bringing labor migrants back to Ukraine, we export them. But these people send money to Ukraine. $13 billion were transferred to Ukraine by those labor migrants. We export people, but they contribute to our balance of payments. And they will cover these losses from gas transit. Inna, as for the situation with mines, the situation is critical. Those state subsidies which cover just salaries of miners and keeping in mind the requirements about decarbonization, our party had suggested several solutions. This will result in a program how we will make transition of, because we continue to hire people to the mines, not thinking how the transition could be done. And we have such programs. They are ready. They are now under discussion. We have done a lot of right things about production of Ukrainian gas. We have cut down the royalty rates for production of new gas, and recently there was the auction, and one of big companies will make production in Ukraine, which will pay stable taxes, and they believe their investment is sufficiently protected in Ukraine. So we need to develop our plans on production of Ukrainian domestic gas. Thank you, dear speaker. Thank you for finding time and for attending our session. Thank you.